street, and you'd see another little flag with a gold star, and that would be in the window, and that meant that another person from our neighborhood had been killed. And if there was a silver star, then it would, that meant that he was wounded. And so our parents would react to that every time something like that happened. But because of the lack of communication, I don't think it was as difficult for them on a daily basis. It was only when they heard the numbers being killed and that type of thing that it would really bother them.
You said you were stationed in Japan for 2 years. Could you describe the living conditions there?
The people pretended to like us, but you had to look back at the whole idea that we had decimated 2 of their cities. We had firebombed Tokyo in one of the worst disasters that the world has ever known, where hundreds of bombers went over and just lit up these little shacks, and hundreds of thousands of people had been killed. But on the surface, what they wanted to do was rebuild their lives. And so they tried as hard as they could to have us not quite feel at home, but at least coexist with them. Now, I was very fortunate. I met a Sergeant Bartelheim at the airport, and he said that he liked to get paid twice a month instead of once a month. There was nothing illegal about it. It was just easier for him, and he had married a young Japanese lady, and so we did that. As a result, I was able to travel around Japan and see a lot of Japan. And another perk that I had was we did not have real American money. We had what we call script, and that wore out very, very quickly. So we would have to take it from Camp Otsu, about 90 miles north, to Tokyo so that it could be burned. And I was able to just wander the streets of Tokyo. My buddy and I would go to the palace. We were able to go to the parliament. But what I remember most clearly was going into the little streets of Tokyo and Yokohama and wandering around the stalls in there where people sold food. And one of my strongest memories is seeing these baskets full of fish eyeballs, which I had never seen before. So you have hundreds of eyeballs just staring back at you. Another time showing how the Japanese would cooperate with us and try to help us. I went up to Yokohama to pick up a car for an officer to drive it back to Otsu, about 90 miles. And there were no roads at the time. They hadn't rebuilt it, and there wasn't much space. And so we got to a certain point in the car where we just couldn't move down the end of an alley. And I still remember they called the fire department. The fire department came out. They took down a row of fences around houses so we could squeeze our Ford between them. And then we drove back to Otsu. Then, as I say, I was fortunate through the airport to fly around. I was on the Camp Otsu softball team. So we did get a chance to go to some of the other cities. I saw Nagasaki from the air. Now this was 1955, about 8-9 years after the bombing. And it was sad because it was still desolate. I saw it from the air because we were not allowed to go into Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It was just too tough on the people in there. they just wouldn't accept us yet, even after 9 years. But I was able to see the people from those cities in a different situation. Camp Otsu was right next to the ancient capital of Japan, which was Kyoto. And as you realize here, has the same letters as Tokyo, so they just transposed the letters a little bit. But it was the religious center. And on a daily basis, there were numerous processions and celebrations, and I enjoyed watching these from the point of view that as the little kids had the most colorful kimonos on, and as they got a little bit older, they got a little bit darker, so that by the time you got up to 45, 50 and so forth, then you had the black kimonos. But we were able to talk to these little kids and play games with them and try to show them that we were trying to rebuild their country. Most of us had not been in the actual combat, so we had a different feeling that that we could help these people rather than just be enemies.
So what was the most difficult part of this, the whole scenario you placed in with the war?
I would say interacting with the people whom we had really hurt. I remember one time going into the castle, the Emperor's castle, and there was an elevator in there, and the elevator was right next to a staircase with a red carpet going up. So Walt and I decided, well, we'd rather walk up than take the elevator. And right away somebody came over and said, no, that's just for the Emperor. And there were two men standing next to it, and we went over to the elevator, and they came over with us. We got in the elevator, and they turned their backs on us. They just wouldn't talk to us, they just wouldn't look at us. And then it was the feeling, even when we were up in Kyoto talking to these little kids in their wonderful bright clothing and so forth, you always felt that there was a barrier between you and them, that we had done something awful to them. And you can go back and say, well, you know, it was something we had to do. But I think the worst thing, way down in my stomach, I always had this controversy of, should we have dropped the 2 A-bombs? Was that the only solution we had? And there were arguments on both sides. But I think that's my worst memory of seeing a look in their eyes because of all the destruction we had caused, that they just didn't trust us.
How did the war affect your life post-war?
Post-war, once it was over for me. I had a chance to go to school and become a commissioned officer if I wanted to, because I had taken some German in school, and I had passed the initial German interpreter's exam. I guess, you know, it's always a joke, if you pass the German exam, they send you to Japan. So when I get out, the Army was just something in the past. It really didn't affect my life. I went back and finished up college up in Merrimack College up in North Andover. And to me, that was the end of Army life. The only part that was really great after I got out was the fact that I had the GI Bill, and that paid my way through the last 2 years of college and also a year of graduate school, so that was great.